I didn't say a word when the HOA president screamed about violating access codes and illegally altering the subdivision gate. I just handed the judge the plat map, the original easement agreement from 1983, and a notarized letter from the county commissioner. He read in silence for maybe 20 seconds, then slowly looked up and asked the HOS lawyer if they'd like to revise their statement before continuing. The lawyer didn't even respond, just started packing his briefcase like someone had pulled the fire alarm. 3 months earlier, they towed my truck while I was unconscious in the ICU. Now they were finding out that the only legal entrance into the entire neighborhood ran through my land. I wasn't always the type to read land use codes like bedtime stories or spend weekends cross-referencing survey maps. Back then, I just wanted to be left alone. After 25 years of firefighting, most of them in the city, I bought the plot my uncle left me when he passed, 5 acres of mixed pine and oak tucked just outside town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. The kind of place where you could step outside and hear nothing but cicadas and your own heartbeat. My plan was simple. Fix up the cabin, maybe keep bees again like I did as a kid, and let my body finally rest in a place that didn't smell like diesel or smoke. The road into the subdivision, Bent Ridge Estates, ran along the southern edge of my land. Always had. In fact, that narrow stretch of gravel was the only way in or out of the entire neighborhood. It looked like part of the main road, but if you walked the boundary line with a copy of the original plat map, you'd see it cut right through my DAD property. It was technically mine, though I'd never cared to make an issue of it. People used it for decades without a problem. I kept it graded when I had the time. No one ever asked, no one ever thanked me either. But I didn't need that. Peace was enough. Then, the HOA decided peace was a problem. The first notice came while I was recovering at home after a minor surgery. I still had a drainage tube in my side when I opened the envelope. Unauthorized vehicle, parked in violation of Section 4B of the covenants. My truck, an old F250, I used to haul lumber and tools, was apparently unsightly and obstructive to community standards. It wasn't blocking anything. I'd parked it on the shoulder, near the old utility pole on my own side of the gravel, exactly where I'd left it a dozen times before. I figured it was a mistake, maybe someone new on the board, eager to make a name for themselves. I ignored it. 2 weeks later, I collapsed in my living room. Pancreatitis. Bad enough to land me in intensive care for 6 days. When I finally came to and my brother brought me home, the truck was gone. Towed. Not even by the county, but by some private outfit hired by the HOA. They did just move it off the road. They hauled it over a mile and dumped it in a fenced lot near the landfill. It cost $1,400 to get it back. The driver, a kid barely in his 20s, handed me a clipboard and said, "The HOA requested it. They said it was their road." I didn't even get angry. It just felt cold. Numb. Like something hard and permanent had clicked into place. It wasn't just the truck. They were testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push. And they didn't know that the very road they used to tow my vehicle was the rope they'd just put around their own neck. At first, I tried the reasonable route. I wrote the board a letter. Calm, polite, direct. I explained that the truck wasn't on their land, that they'd towed from private property, that I had no covenant agreement with the HOA, and was never a member. I asked for reimbursement and suggested we meet to discuss easement terms like adults. They didn't respond. Instead, 2 weeks later, I received a certified cease and desist, ordering me to stop obstructing access to community property. They claimed the road was HOA maintained and part of the original subdivision plan, which might have been true if it weren't for one small problem. The original subdivision plan was never finalized. My uncle had denied the easement transfer in 1982. The county records showed it clear as day. The final plat was filed, but the land use agreement was never signed. Bent Ridge Estates was built on the assumption that they had access, but legally, they didn't. That's when I stopped writing letters and started pulling files. County Assessor's Office, Recorder of Deeds. I even drove to the State Library in Raleigh to dig up the archived development plans. It took about 6 weeks, but when I was done, I had a binder 3 inches thick. aerial photos, signed statements, surveyor's notes, and one key document, a 1983 easement reservation, stating that my land provided the only ingress and egress for the subdivision, and that access was permissive, not permanent. Permissive, not permanent. Those 3 words might as well have been a fuse, because what they meant was I had the legal right to revoke it. I didn't do it right away. I'm not petty. I didn't want to make 42 families hostages of their own HOA's stupidity. But I did start recording every interaction. I put trail cams along the boundary. I kept screenshots of every email. When they tried to find me again, Time 4 road maintenance neglect, I smiled, printed it, and added it to the file. By mid-May, I'd had enough. I filed a quiet title action to formally establish ownership of the road section in question. That forced them to respond in court, which they did, arrogantly, with a countersuit alleging I was interfering with community access. They claimed they had an easement by necessity, not realizing that such easements only apply when no other access exists, and when the property owner hasn't already granted permissive use. I had, for years, that generosity, which brings us back to that courtroom. Small, hot, fluorescent lit. I wore a pressed shirt and brought nothing but facts. Their lawyer brought color printouts of my truck. The judge wasn't impressed. I showed him the easement reservation, the letter from the county engineer verifying the road's private status, a map showing the only ingress point passed directly over my parcel, and, finally, a notarized revocation notice I had served to the HOA 2 days prior. Effective immediately. I was restricting access to all non-residents, unless they signed a license agreement and paid for maintenance fees, including their landscapers, their garbage contractors, their Amazon deliveries. There was no gavel bang, no southing. Just silence as the judge nodded slowly and said, "Well, it seems Mr. Garland here runs your front door." They tried to negotiate, offered me a yearly fee to restore access. Primera declined. Said I'd be happy to let individual homeowners sign agreements, but I wouldn't deal with the HOA anymore. Too much bad blood. And legally, I didn't have to. The board resigned within a month. The president moved out that summer. Their management company dropped the contract after I forwarded them the court transcript and informed them they'd been accessing private land without authorization for over a decade. I didn't sue for damages, but I could have. Still might. Now, things are quieter. Not the way they were before. There's still tension. Still a few bitter looks when I drive by in the F250, but nobody parks on my land anymore.